This is a unique period. We've only gone through something like this once before, which was the shift of America from an agrarian to an industrial society. But what's happening now is revolutionary. We're moving from a national, analog, industrial economy to a global, digital, information economy. And what's happened is all of our social institutions, whether it's schools or universities or government or healthcare or the finance industry or media, appear to be broken. And so we're trying to figure out, what do you do with them? They need to be refitted for a new society. And we're basically saying you got two choices. One is you can repair them and try to make the existing institutions better. And the other is you got to replace them. You can't make the existing institutions better. They're too deeply flawed. And both those things are going on right now. So if you look at schools, what we have in the repair category is there are people who are taking on the superintendencies of major school systems. And what they're trying to do is make them better. Can you make these things really work? And then at the periphery of this, we have a bunch of organizations that are saying, that model basically works. And that model is one that's based on the industrial design in which we focus on common processes for all organizations and all activities. Sort of like the assembly line. And that's what schools look like. We take people at age 5, we march them through 180-day years, 180-day years for 12 years. We hand them a diploma. They take courses for lengths of time prescribed by the Carnegie Foundation in 1908. And it's also time fixed. So those other organizations are saying, that's a decent model, we can save that. And there are organizations like Teach for America. And what they're saying is, change who we recruit to become teachers and change how they're prepared. And we can work within that model and make it successful. Then there are others that are saying, just change the governance and we can make it successful. And those are charter companies. Then there are others that are saying, change the curriculum, change the calendar, and we can make it successful. And those are organizations like KIPP. But they're still basically working on the same design, either inside or outside the system. And then there are the people who are doing the replace. And what they're basically doing is, and this is very early, but they're inventing new kinds of schools. And maybe one of the prototypes is Education for One, School of One, which basically is outcome focused. So we're talking about schools that are focusing on learning rather than teaching. They are individualized, so it meets my need, which is different from that of other children in the class. They're interactive, and they're time variable. My education moves as quickly or as slowly as it takes for me to master the material, using a variety of modes of instruction. So we stand right now as the obvious question is, so what should we choose? And the answer is we have to choose both. And the reason is, the first kind, the repair, I've sort of started calling Schindler's List kind of change. How many can you save? And we need to save a lot of people because we're not ready for the new school yet. We can't create it yet. So we've got to have at least 2 generations that we educate by current methods, but we've got to make them a lot better to save those children. And then what's going to happen is, by successful approximations, we're going to create a new kind of school. And if I were imagining what would happen, it would be this, that gradually we'll see the number of institutions. I didn't know whether it's gradually. We're going to see the number of institutions increase with better modeling one after another. And we're going to see the number of traditional institutions begin to close. And gradually the balance will shift between the older type industrial model and the new information economy model. And after a while, what we'll see is the money, the regulation, and the laws move to the second model as that becomes the norm. the most interesting thing to watch right now, given that education is a provider-driven industry. What that means is education determines what it is that people study. And the fact that we are that means that the process of change is slower in education. What's fascinating to watch is media, which is consumer-driven. And so we can see now is the grand old models, like the Washington Post, just sold for $250 million, the Boston Globe for $75 million. The franchises that were very, very valuable are losing their value. And what's happening simultaneously is they can see the kinds of changes that will probably occur in education. You can see the consumers picking the services and activities they want. You can see the individualization. You can see the disintermediation, talent looming larger than the institutions that offer it, and so on and so forth. It's an incredible space to watch if what we're talking about is reforming education that's coming. It's a really hard question to answer. And what makes it hard is if we can create the kind of leader who can run the school that we talked about, can lead the school, can build the school, there are no jobs for that person right now. We have a set of existing institutions, and they don't look like the school I just described as the future coming. So in essence, we have a job preparing people who can straddle both worlds. You have to be able to think about current schools and how to transform them, how to make them work, how to move them into an outcome-based, learning-based society. At the same time, begin to think about the kinds of schools that are coming and begin to move them in that direction. That becomes a very, very hard set of jobs. We're essentially preparing people to live in a time of transition between two worlds and have the set of skills they're going to need to operate in each. So that's sort of like training for two jobs. And the kind of program that I would favor, having looked at school leadership programs and finding that they aren't very good at the moment, I did a big study of school leadership programs around the country. And what I found was that they are low in selectivity. They're the weakest programs that ed schools offer, much worse than teacher education in terms of admissions criteria. Well, a large number of people who are taking those programs never intend to become school leaders. They want a master's degree for a salary bump. And they're asking for programs that are fast, that are easy, and that are very, very convenient. So there's sort of a race to the bottom to meet that need. How low can we lower the requirements to get those people? The second ingredient is, given how low the admission standards are, the graduation standards are equally low. The programs don't make a lot of sense right now. In part of the study I talked about, we asked people who are educational administrators who are taking educational administration degrees, what courses did you study in your master's program? And it turned out there was only one course on the principalship in the whole program. So we took that course out, we took the other 8, whatever the number was, and sent that list to people around the country and asked them, what do you think this would prepare people for? What do you think this is for? And they said, a general overview of the field of education? We're not preparing people very well. The curriculum doesn't make any sense. Beyond that, the clinical experience, too often because of demand for fast degrees, just shadow the person whose school you're in, if it's that. And that person may be a failing leader, a successful leader, but that's just fine. The faculty are not strong, the research is not strong. Other than that, these are very good programs. I'd add one other ingredient, which is, if the master's degree is weak, the doctorate is also as large a conundrum. The question of why somebody needs to write a dissertation, to earn a doctorate, to be a superintendent, is really quite elusive. We create watered down degrees for those people in which the quality of the research they take or do isn't that strong. We force them to take a whole lot of research methods courses they're never going to use in their lives. and to study a whole bunch of material that's irrelevant to what they do, while the kinds of skills they need are not included in the program. So, if I had my druthers, if I could reinvent it, it's what I'm working on now. What I really favor is an MBA in school leadership. And what I have in mind here is a program that would teach the kinds of skills and knowledge that I described earlier as being required by the schools of the future. What happened, though, is I want it to be a rigorous terminal degree. And what would be useful about it would be, imagine if we were teaching a whole set of skills. Let's say one of those skills was human resources. Well, what would happen if we had a competency-based curriculum? What do you need to know and be able to do in that area? Whole curriculum should be competency-based. And what would happen now if we take the skills and knowledge that traditionally accrue to management and leadership programs outside of ed schools, and we now apply them to context of education? So we're now studying HR in education. So you take material on that in the academic side, and you embed the thing into a clinical experience. Maybe the best place to learn HR for schools isn't a school. Maybe it's a brewery that has a really good program. Maybe it's the corporation down the block. And what if we tie both these things together with a common project across the academics and across the clinical experience? And we do that throughout the entire curriculum. And we move away from stories of my life on the frontier as a school administrator to case studies, simulations, and other brands of education. And what would happen if this would entitle me to go become principal? I'd add one more piece. What would happen if we shifted the model? The current model is a university hangs out a sign and says, we're offering master's degrees in educational administration. What would happen instead if the program were a B2B model with school districts? So you ask the school district, tell us who your leaders are. We will educate them. We'll also work with you on education of your current teacher force, of your current administrative force. And so what we'll do is we will prepare leaders. You will pay for those leaders. And what will happen is you're promising us that you're going to have them in a leadership position in the space of 2 years, or you can't be part of this program. So if we could create that model, create the program I'm describing, and what would happen is this would prepare you to be a principal. Now at some point, let's say you decide you want to be a superintendent. Is the best thing that we could offer you a doctorate? I don't think so. What would happen if instead of that doctorate, we offered you some instruction over the summer on the difference between a building and a district? And then what happened was you had a really good internship with a top superintendent. And then what happened was, once you were on the job, we got you a coach. That seems to be far more effective than going and taking a doctorate. That's what I would do if I could redesign school leadership education. Maybe. I'm not certain. It's interesting. I have greater qualms about doing that for a principal than I do for a superintendent.
Right.
With our current superintendent structure, the average time on the job for an urban district is 3 years. So it doesn't matter who you bring in.
Right.
If you're only going to be there 3 years, we're talking about turning an ocean liner,
Right.
which won't happen in 3 years. So more than the background, I'm more concerned with the tenure. But let's say we get to background. We've had some very, very successful superintendents who haven't come out of education. They've been smart enough to buttress themselves with staffs that do come out of education. And there's also a time in which you can't do the same old, same old. So I'm wide open to the possibility of superintendents, but I want people who have a better sense of education at the school level, because they clearly have to be leaders of a teacher force, have to understand what happens in the classroom and how one goes about doing it. So I don't have ironclad rules. Those are merely my prejudices.
talk to each
I actually
other?
think it's worthwhile. Um, Given the fact that after almost 30 years of a school reform movement, we've failed to turn around even one urban school district in the United States, it may imply that the design we've used for change hasn't been so good. So I'm willing to try lots of things at this point.
Mhm.
And I can see all kinds of reasons the private sector would want to enter education. The fact of the matter is, it's low in productivity, it's high in cost, it's bad in management, it's low in use of technology. And for them, I think it looks increasingly like the next healthcare,
Right,
ready for a remake.
right.
And when you look at this business, let's see, it's subsidized, education in general. If you go K through 16, it's counter-cyclical. When the economy is bad, people get more education.
Right.
What's also true about it is it's a big buy, which is it's not like having to sell milk every day. You buy this once a year, twice a year, three times a year, and you're done. What's also true is the cash comes up front, and it's a growth industry. That's a nice set of criteria.
Right.
So that's why I think it would be appealing to the private sector. For education in the United States, I'm not one of those people who believes because something's for profit it's bad. The fact of the matter is, I'd rather buy my computer from Apple than from the Department of Commerce. One's clearly not enough for profit. But I think people can do this who haven't done it as well as we've seen it in the past. We have little to lose at this point. We're denying so many of our children a decent education that I think that with safeguards, we should allow different kinds of providers to get into this market. And I'm eager for that to happen. The situation of education is not unique. Um, it's happening to every social institution in the country. And I remember a conversation I had with then Mayor Giuliani. I had just arrived at Teachers College, and he called me to City Hall. I'd been there about a week. The topic of our conversation was how terrible education was. And I really got the sense they thought I was doing a terrible job, even though I hadn't unpacked yet. And I remember being really furious. And very calmly, I said, your business is the same shape as ours. And you think that people in education now are less able, more self-serving, and failing our schools. We think the same thing about people in government right now. You're telling me that people are withdrawing from schools and they're moving to the suburbs, they're moving to private schools. And I'm telling you people are withdrawing from government, they're not voting. You don't want to give us money, we don't want to give you money. You don't like unions, we don't like political parties, you don't like tenure, we want term limits, and we both want somebody in the other guy's office who comes out of the business community, both of which have actually happened. So this isn't as if education did something wrong. We're not in a world in which education needs to be excoriated for the horrible things that it's done to allow us to get to this situation. The fact of the matter is that what's happened is that demographics have changed profoundly. We've seen the population in our schools move to, for the first time, to the suburbs. We have a majority of Americans living in the suburbs, which has had the effect of isolating poor populations in our inner city, predominantly of color. We've also seen the population move west and south out of the Northeast, Middle Atlantic states, New England, which has had the effect of changing not only the whole voting pattern of the country, moving it from blue to red, but it's also had the effect of disproportionate numbers of schools, colleges to population in many regions of the country. And the fastest growing groups in the country are those with which we've been least successful. Immigrants have hit the highest levels that we've seen in the history of this country in numbers, not percentages. At the very beginning, there were a large number of immigrants coming to this country. So that we're talking about profound changes in demographics plus baby boomers are going to be retiring, opening up all kinds of jobs. Second thing we're seeing is an economy in which all of the jobs that required little education, or most, are moving abroad or disappearing. And the jobs we have now require much higher levels than ever before of education, necessitating states to demand that our children achieve higher levels than we've seen before, highest levels in history. And what I was talking about a little bit before, I talked about the shift from industrial to information economies. Industrial economies focusing on process, information economies focusing on outcomes. But the more profound part of that is our schools focus on teaching. They're going to focus on learning. They're going to be asked to focus on learning. What we're going to do is move from time fixed to time variable. The teacher is going to move out of the center of the picture. The student's going to move into the center of the picture. And we're talking about revolutionary change. Once you focus on outcomes, we need new standards. And the Common Core is a part of that. And the other thing that we're going to put in place is, how do you know when kids are getting to those outcomes? We're talking about testing. And we're going to see an evolution of testing in ways we never imagined. We're going to see the other forces that are impinging upon us are new technologies. And that's a wild card. Everything is up for grabs. The textbook is going to die. I saw a new textbook. And the way it would work is that one person is in this class with me, and he takes this test, or he's taking a course in fraction division, and just wonderful, and finishes the unit in no time at all. I'm in the same class. I don't get fractions at all. And the textbook figures out what mistakes I'm making and keeps giving me new material. That not only changes the nature of textbooks, it also changes the nature of testing. What happens now with each answer I give, I'm being tested. But it's not high stakes. It's what I need to master the area. So we move from our series of formative evaluations until the last formative evaluation is summative. That's where we're heading. We're heading for testing that looks like a GPS, as opposed to, imagine if your GPS worked this way. So what happened is, the GPS only gives you readings every hour. At the end of the hour, it says, oh my, it says, you're 80 miles out of your way and you're going in the wrong direction. Recalculating. No, it gives you, at the moment, readings, tells you when you've made your error, tells you what to do. That's the way testing is going to be in school, and technology is going to radically change all of that and the nature of education and individualize it. What's also true is that we're going to see government's going to be asking for entirely different things out of schools than it has in the past. And they're going to focus very much on the outcomes. They're going to focus on accountability. They're going to set requirements. We've seen it in K-12 with No Child Left Behind. We're going to see it in higher education. And it's going to work out, I think, a lot like Medicare, in which government fixes prices. And if higher education can't clean its own house, we're going to see increasing regulation. And we're also going to see this thing come in privatization, for all the reasons I described before. And we're also going to see a merger of all knowledge organizations. And my favorite examples are, we're going to see libraries and museums and publishers and media companies and hardware companies and universities and schools all get into the business of offering courseware and trying to build audiences. They're going to be inseparable. And it means that at the moment, I went to visit a publisher. Okay. So I'm sitting in his anteroom. And there are all these books along all the walls. And finally the publisher comes out. And he says to me, we're not in the book business anymore. And he said, we're in the knowledge business. And I think he saw me roll my eyes. And he said, let me give you an example. What he really said was, let me give you an example if you can understand. And he says, we're in 12,000 schools. We're offering professional development, and we're offering we're offering pre-service education. He had my full attention now at the time I was president of Teachers College. He'd gone directly into my business. No university in the country has that kind of penetration. So I thought I still had an edge. I said, where are you getting your content from? Thinking he had to be coming to me. And his answer was, oh, I hire full-time content providers. And I thought about that. And I don't have any friends who are full-time content providers. My parents didn't have any friends. I have no neighbors who are full-time content providers. So I asked this guy, what's a full-time content provider? And it turned out we just had different names for them. I called them assistant professors, and he called them full-time content providers. Though he could give bonuses, and he'd give stock options, and I couldn't. And the last piece here is, I asked him about credits and degrees. And he said, we're still working on that. Well, they're not anymore. They have degree granting authority. So that these are really replacements for existing kinds of organizations. It's happened in K-12 and it's happened in higher ed. And the interesting thing right now, when we need comments in the media on the state of education, they don't really turn to major school chancellors or major higher education presidents. They're turned to Bill Gates because he's perceived as being far further along in thinking about the future of education than traditional educators are.